My father-in-law once told me that a man's worth is measured by the weight of his wallet. He said it at Thanksgiving dinner, right in front of my wife, right in front of his whole family, and everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I just sat there, cutting my turkey, pretending I didn't feel the knife twist in my chest. For 8 years, I let him believe my wallet was empty. For 8 years, I absorbed every insult, every snide comment, every condescending smirk from people who thought they were better than me because they had bigger houses and fancier cars. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that love was enough, that my wife would see my worth even if her family couldn't. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. But on Christmas night, in front of 40 strangers at the most expensive restaurant in the city, my father-in-law was about to find out just how wrong he was about me. My name is Owen Briggs. I'm 34 years old, and for the last decade of my life I've worked as a furniture restoration craftsman. I take broken things and make them whole again. Antique dressers with cracked drawers, rocking chairs that belonged to someone's great-grandmother, dining tables that have hosted 50 years of family dinners. People bring me their memories, and I bring those memories back to life with my hands. It's honest work. It's good work. But to my wife's family, the Thornberrys, it meant I was nobody. My wife Delia and I met 9 years ago at a county fair. She was different then. She laughed easily. She didn't care that I drove an old truck or that my clothes came from thrift stores. She said she loved my hands, loved watching me work, loved that I could create something beautiful out of something broken. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Her parents barely showed up. Her father, Vance, looked at me like I was something he needed to scrape off his shoe. Her mother, Lorene, smiled politely while her eyes said everything her mouth wouldn't. I thought it would get better. I thought once they got to know me, once they saw how much I loved their daughter, they'd accept me. They never did. Vance Thornberry owns 4 car dealerships across the state. He's loud, he's wealthy, and he's made it his personal mission to remind me at every family gathering that I'm not good enough for his daughter. His wife, Lorene, is quieter, but just as cruel. She delivers her insults wrapped in silk, disguised as concern. And their son Hollis, Delia's younger brother, is a 29-year-old man who's never worked a hard day in his life but somehow thinks he has the right to mock me for working with my hands. For 8 years, I endured it. I kept my head down, I worked harder. I loved my wife and hoped she'd stand by me. But Delia changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. She stopped defending me, she stopped looking at me. By the end, I was living with a woman who seemed embarrassed that I existed. The only family I ever had was my mother, who passed away when I was 25, and her older brother, my uncle Clement. Clement was a quiet man who lived in a modest cabin in the woods. He wore flannel shirts and old boots, and he drove a truck that was even more beat up than mine. When I was 18, he handed me something I never understood. A matte black card with no logo, no bank name, nothing except a name embossed in silver, Clement Farrow. He told me to keep it with me always. He said not to use it unless I truly needed it. And then he said something that stayed with me for 16 years. When you do use it, they'll know exactly who you are. I never knew what that meant. I asked him, but he just smiled and said I'd understand when the time came. Uncle Clement died 3 years ago. I never used the card. I kept it in my wallet as a memento, a small piece of him I could carry with me every day. On Christmas night, I sat at a long table in a restaurant called the Winthrop, surrounded by the Thornberry family and their extended relatives. 42 people, all of them connected to Vance's money, all of them looking at me like I didn't belong. And that's when my wife reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. Divorce papers, signed and dated 2 weeks earlier. Her father raised his glass and announced to the entire table that I'd be homeless by February. The whole room erupted in applause. 40 people, clapping and cheering at my destruction on Christmas night. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of every insult, every dismissal, Every moment I'd been made to feel like nothing. Then I reached into my wallet and pulled out the black card my uncle gave me 16 years ago. I handed it to the waiter. He looked at the name, and his face went pale. He leaned down and whispered 5 words that silenced the entire table. This is the story of how I stopped being invisible. This is the story of the night everything changed. I need to take you back a bit so you understand how I ended up at that table, surrounded by people who despised me, holding divorce papers on Christmas night. I grew up in a small house on the east side of town with my mother, Ruth Briggs. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, and she taught me that hard work and integrity mattered more than money ever could. She passed away when I was 25, and losing her nearly broke me. The only person who kept me grounded was her older brother, my Uncle Clement. Clement Farrow was a man of few words. He lived alone in a cabin about an hour outside the city, surrounded by woods and silence. He wore the same kind of clothes I wear now, flannels, work boots, jeans that had seen better days. He drove an old truck that rattled when it started, and he never seemed to care what anyone thought of him. When I was a kid, I spent summers with him. He taught me how to work with my hands, how to sand wood until it was smooth as glass, how to see the beauty in something broken and bring it back to life. That's where my love for furniture restoration came from. Uncle Clement gave me that gift. On my 18th birthday, he handed me the black card. I remember the weight of it in my palm, heavier than a normal card, solid and strange. No logo, no numbers, just his name in silver letters, Clement Farrow. I asked him what it was for. He looked at me with those calm, knowing eyes and said, "Keep this with you, Owen. Don't use it unless you truly need it. And when you do, they'll know exactly who you are." I pressed him for more, but he wouldn't explain. He just smiled and told me I'd understand when the time was right. I carried that card in my wallet for 16 years. When Uncle Clement passed away 3 years ago, I held on to it even tighter. It was the last piece of him I had. Now, let me tell you about Delia. When I met her at that county fair 9 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. She was beautiful, kind, and she had a laugh that made everything else disappear. We talked for hours that first night, standing by the Ferris wheel, and she told me she'd never met anyone like me before. She said she admired how I worked with my hands. She said there was something real about me, something honest that she couldn't find in the men her parents wanted her to date. We fell in love fast, maybe too fast. Within 2 years we were married. I didn't have much to offer her in terms of money, but I promised to love her, support her, and stand by her no matter what. I meant every word. Her family made their disapproval clear from the start. Vance Thornberry looked at me during our first meeting and asked what I did for a living. When I told him I restored antique furniture, he laughed and said, "So, you're a handyman?" He didn't wait for me to respond before turning away. Lorene was more subtle. She smiled and said, "How charming," in a voice that made the word sound like an insult. She asked Delia privately if she was sure about her decision. Delia told me about it later, and she was furious at her mother. She said she didn't care what they thought, that she loved me. That was the woman I married. That was the Delia I fell in love with. But families have a way of wearing people down. Year after year, holiday after holiday, the comments piled up. Vance never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't a real provider. Lorene would mention how well her friends' sons-in-law were doing, doctors and lawyers and executives, while looking at me with pity. Hollis called me the repairman, like it was a joke everyone was in on except me. And slowly, Delia stopped defending me. At first, she would squeeze my hand under the table when her father made his remarks. She would tell me later that she was sorry, that she knew I was worth more than they could see. Then the hand squeezes stopped. Then the apologies stopped. Then she started looking at me the way her parents did. By our 6th year of marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Delia and I barely spoke. She spent more time with her family than with me. When I asked her what was wrong, she would say nothing and walk away. I worked harder, I took on more projects. I thought if I could just earn more, if I could just prove myself, things would get better. They didn't. The night before Christmas Eve, I found Delia on the phone with her mother. I heard her say, "I know, Mom, I should have listened to you from the beginning." She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. She didn't know I heard every word. I went to bed that night feeling like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for someone to push him off. The next evening, we drove to the Winthrop in silence. Delia wore a red dress and diamond earrings her father had given her. I wore my only nice shirt, the one I saved for occasions when I needed to pretend I belonged in her world. I had no idea that in less than 2 hours, my entire life would change forever. The Winthrop was the kind of restaurant that made you feel underdressed no matter what you wore. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. White marble floors reflected the soft golden light. Waiters in tailored suits moved silently between tables like ghosts trained in elegance. I had never belonged in places like this. I knew it the moment we walked through the door. Vance had reserved a private dining room for the family's Christmas dinner. When Delia and I arrived, the long table was already filling up with Thornberrys and their extended relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates. 42 people in total, all connected by blood or money to the man who sat at the head of the table like a king surveying his kingdom. Vance wore a navy suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Lorene sat beside him in pearls and silk, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Hollis was already slouched in his chair with a whiskey in his hand, scrolling through his phone with the bored expression of a man who had never earned anything in his life. Delia walked ahead of me and took her seat next to her mother. I followed and sat beside her, nodding politely to the relatives who glanced my way. Most of them didn't bother to acknowledge me. I was used to that. The dinner began with small talk. Vacations to Europe, new cars, stock portfolios. Someone's son had just been accepted to Harvard. Someone else's daughter was getting married to a hedge fund manager. The conversation flowed around me like a river around a stone, and I sat there in silence, cutting my appetizer into small pieces I didn't taste. Then Vance turned his attention to me. "Owen," he said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "how's the chair business? Fix anything exciting this year?" A few people chuckled. I forced a small smile. "It's been a good year," I said. "Steady work." Vance leaned back in his chair and swirled his wine. "Steady. That's a nice way of saying you're barely scraping by, isn't it? You know, I was talking to Bradley Kenton last week. You remember Bradley, don't you, Delia? The surgeon? He just bought a house in the hills, paid cash, $4 million. He looked at me with a grin that had no warmth in it. "What did you buy this year, Owen? A new sander?" The table erupted in laughter. I felt my face flush, but I kept my expression neutral. I had learned a long time ago that reacting only made it worse. Lorene leaned forward with her practiced smile. "We're not trying to be cruel, Owen. We just worry about Delia's future. A woman needs security. Surely you understand that." I understood exactly what she was saying. She was saying I wasn't enough. She was saying I never would be. Hollis raised his glass in my direction. "Hey, at least he's consistent." Consistently broke. More laughter. Louder this time. I gripped my fork and stared at my plate. I told myself to stay calm. It was almost over. Just a few more hours and I could go home and pretend this night never happened. That's when Delia reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope and placed it on the table in front of me. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it." I picked up the envelope and unsealed it. Inside was a stack of legal documents. I didn't need to read past the first page to understand what I was holding: petition for dissolution of marriage. My hands trembled. I looked at Delia, searching her face for something, anything, that resembled the woman I had married. "You're divorcing me on Christmas?" She still wouldn't look at me. "I've made my decision, Owen. I should have done this years ago. My father was right. You're never going to be anything." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Vance slammed his palm on the table, grinning like a man who had just won a war. "Finally, my daughter has come to her senses." He raised his wine glass high. "Owen, I'll give you until February to collect your things from the house. After that, you'll be out on the street where you belong. Homeless by February. That has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" He turned to the table with theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to Delia's freedom." Glasses rose around the table. 42 people raised their drinks and applauded. The sound filled the private dining room, echoing off the walls, drowning out everything else. I sat there, frozen, watching my marriage end to the sound of applause. My wife wouldn't look at me. My father-in-law was laughing. Strangers were clapping at my humiliation, and something inside me shifted. I thought about every insult I had swallowed, every time I had stayed silent to keep the peace. Every night I had lain awake wondering why I wasn't enough. I thought about my Uncle Clement. I thought about the card in my wallet. I thought about the words he had spoken to me 16 years ago. "When you use it, they'll know exactly who you are." For the first time in 8 years, I decided to stop being invisible. The applause faded, but the ringing in my ears did not. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had never seen me as anything more than a mistake Delia had made. They were already moving on, refilling their glasses, resuming their conversations as if they hadn't just witnessed the destruction of my marriage. To them, I was already gone. I was already forgotten. Delia was whispering to her mother, probably discussing which room she would move back into at her parents' estate. Hollis was laughing with a cousin about something on his phone. Vance was accepting congratulations from relatives like he had just closed a business deal. I folded the divorce papers carefully and slipped them into my jacket pocket. My hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. Something cold and clear had settled over me, a calmness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was done. A waiter approached our end of the table, a young man with a professional smile and a polished demeanor. He began collecting empty plates, moving efficiently and silently. I raised my hand to get his attention. "Excuse me." He turned to me with polite attentiveness. "Yes, sir. How may I help you?" "I'd like to pay for the table," I said. "The entire table, every check." The waiter blinked. His smile faltered slightly as he processed the request. "Sir, this is a party of 42 guests. The bill will be quite substantial. We're talking several $1,000s at minimum." I nodded. "I understand." Vance's voice cut across the table like a blade. "What are you doing, Owen?" I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the waiter. Vance laughed, that booming, condescending laugh I had heard 100 times. "Did you hear that, everyone? Owen wants to pay for dinner. The man who fixes broken chairs for a living wants to pick up a tab that's probably more than he makes in 6 months." The table rippled with laughter again. Hollis nearly choked on his drink. "Maybe he's planning to wash dishes in the back," Hollis said. "Work off the debt one plate at a time." Lorene shook her head with mock sympathy. "Owen, dear, there's no need to embarrass yourself further. We understand your situation." Delia finally looked at me. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Owen, stop. This is pathetic. You're just making this harder than it needs to be." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. It was old leather, worn at the edges. The same wallet I'd carried for over a decade. I opened it and found the black card sitting where it had always been, tucked behind my driver's license, waiting. I pulled it out and held it for a moment. The weight of it felt different now. It felt like an answer to a question I had been asking my whole life. I handed it to the waiter. "Use this." The waiter took the card with practiced professionalism. He glanced at it casually, the way he probably glanced at 100 credit cards every night. Then he stopped, his eyes widened, the color drained from his face. He looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card again. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Is there a problem?" I asked. The waiter swallowed hard. "Sir, please excuse me for just one moment. I need to speak with my manager." He turned and walked away quickly, disappearing through a door marked "Private" at the far end of the dining room. Vance snorted. "Well, that's that. Card's probably declined, or maybe it's expired. Do you even have a credit limit, Owen, or did the bank laugh you out of the building?" I said nothing. I sat with my hands folded on the table and waited. 2 minutes passed. The conversations around me continued, but I noticed a few people glancing in my direction, curious about what was happening. Then the door opened. The waiter emerged first, walking with a different kind of urgency now. Behind him was an older man in an impeccable charcoal suit. He carried himself with authority and composure, but there was something in his expression I had never seen directed at me before. Respect. His name tag identified him as Mr. Dunmore, General Manager. Mr. Dunmore walked directly to where I was sitting. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. "Mr. Briggs?" I stood and shook his hand. "That's me." Mr. Dunmore's voice was formal but warm. "Sir, I must apologize. We had no idea you would be joining us this evening. If we had known, we would have made very different arrangements for your arrival." Vance leaned forward, his smirk wavering. "What's going on here? Who do you think you're talking to?" Mr. Dunmore didn't acknowledge him. His attention remained fixed entirely on me. "Mr. Briggs, we've contacted the estate's legal team, and they've confirmed everything. Your uncle's instructions were very specific. The moment you presented this card, we were to activate all protocols immediately." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "What protocols?" Mr. Dunmore leaned closer to me. The entire table had gone silent now. Every pair of eyes was fixed on us. He spoke quietly, but in the stillness of that room, every word was perfectly clear. "Sir, your uncle founded this company. He owned it entirely, and upon his passing 3 years ago, full ownership transferred to you." He paused and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mr. Briggs, you own this entire restaurant." The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet, it was the complete absence of sound, as if the air itself had frozen in place. I watched the reactions ripple across the table like a shockwave. Vance's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His mouth hung open, his face caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Lorene's perfectly composed expression cracked, her eyes darting between me and Mr. Dunmore as if waiting for someone to announce this was all a joke. Hollis looked like someone had slapped him across the face. His phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. And Delia. My wife, the woman who had handed me divorce papers 10 minutes ago, stared at me as if she had never seen me before in her life. Mr. Dunmore continued speaking, unaware of the devastation his words were causing. "Mr. Briggs, your uncle Clement Farrow founded Farrow Hospitality 42 years ago. He built it from a single restaurant into one of the most prestigious hospitality groups in the country. The Winthrop is our flagship location, but the group includes 37 restaurants and 12 luxury hotels across the United States. Your uncle stepped away from public life decades ago. He preferred anonymity, but he retained complete ownership of the company until his passing." I found my voice. "I never knew any of this." Mr. Dunmore nodded with understanding. "That was by design, sir. Your uncle left explicit instructions with the estate's legal team. He wanted you to live your life without the burden of wealth until you were ready. The black card was the key. He said that when you finally used it, it would mean you were prepared to step into your inheritance." Vance slammed his palm on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "This is absurd. This is some kind of elaborate prank. Owen is a nobody. He fixes furniture in a rented garage. There's no possible way he owns anything." Mr. Dunmore turned to Vance with a calm but icy politeness. "Sir, I can assure you that our legal department has thoroughly verified Mr. Briggs' identity and his claim to the estate. Every document has been authenticated. Mr. Owen Briggs is the sole owner of Faro Hospitality Group and all its subsidiaries." He paused. "His current net worth, as of this morning's valuation, exceeds $400 million. The number landed on the table like a bomb. $400 million. I watched faces transform around the room. Relatives who hadn't bothered to acknowledge me when I walked in were now staring at me with wide eyes. Cousins who had laughed at Hollis's jokes about my profession looked pale and uncomfortable. The aunts and uncles who had whispered behind my back for 8 years sat in stunned silence. Lorene pressed a hand to her chest as if she might faint. Hollis grabbed his drink and drained it in one gulp. Delia's voice broke through the silence, thin and trembling. "Owen, why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her. I really looked at her. Maybe for the first time in years. I saw the woman who had handed me divorce papers without a shred of remorse. I saw the woman who had let her family tear me apart piece by piece while she stood by and watched. I saw the woman who told me I would never be anything just minutes ago. "I didn't know, Delia," I said quietly. "But let me ask you something. Would it have mattered? You handed me those papers because you thought I was worthless. Your family has spent 8 years treating me like dirt beneath their shoes. None of you ever saw me. You only saw what I didn't have." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I stood up from my chair. "I loved you," I said. "I would have given you everything I had, which wasn't much, but it was real. I would have worked every day of my life to make you happy. But you chose to leave the moment you thought I had nothing left to offer. That tells me everything I need to know about what our marriage really meant to you." I turned to Vance. His face had gone from red to white, and a thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. "You told me I'd be homeless by February," I said. "That's interesting, Vance, because according to the records Mr. Dunmore's team just confirmed, Faro Properties holds the lease on the building where your dealership headquarters is located. That means I'm your landlord." Vance's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "So let me make something clear," I continued. "You will be out of that building by February. Consider it a parting gift from the nobody who fixes chairs for a living." I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and slipped it on. "Mr. Dunmore, please send tonight's bill to my office. The entire dinner is on me. Consider it my final gift to the Thornberry family, a reminder of the man they thought was worthless." I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Delia call my name. I heard the scrape of a chair as she stood. I felt her hand reach for my arm. I didn't stop. At the door, I paused and turned back one last time. 42 faces stared at me, frozen in shock and disbelief. "My uncle once told me that a man's worth isn't measured by his wallet," I said. "It's measured by how he treats people when he thinks no one important is watching. Tonight I watched all of you, and now I know exactly what you're worth." I walked out into the cold December night. The snow was falling softly, blanketing the city in white. The air was sharp and clean, and for the first time in 8 years, I could breathe. I didn't look back. The days that followed that Christmas dinner were the quietest of my life. I drove back to the small house I had shared with Delia, packed a single suitcase, and left before she returned. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want explanations or apologies. I just wanted to close that chapter and start fresh. The divorce went through faster than I expected. Delia's lawyers tried to contest it at first. They argued that she hadn't been aware of my assets and that she was entitled to a portion of the estate. But here's the thing about irony. The prenuptial agreement her father had insisted on years ago, the one designed to protect the Thornberry fortune from me, worked perfectly in reverse. Delia had signed away any claim to assets acquired before or outside the marriage. She got exactly what she had planned to leave me with. Nothing. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Vance's dealership lost its lease 3 months later. I didn't renew it. I didn't do it out of revenge or spite. I simply had no obligation to continue doing business with a man who had spent nearly a decade trying to destroy me. He relocated to a smaller property on the outskirts of town, and within a year, 2 of his 4 locations had closed permanently. The man, who once mocked me for fixing chairs, was now struggling to keep his own business from falling apart. Lorene sent me a letter about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. It was 3 pages long, filled with apologies and explanations and requests to meet for coffee so we could start fresh. She said she had always liked me and that Vance's behavior didn't reflect her true feelings. I read the letter once, folded it neatly, and threw it in the trash. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Hollis reached out too. He sent me a message on social media, suddenly friendly, suddenly interested in catching up. He mentioned he had some business ideas he wanted to discuss and thought maybe I could help him get started. I blocked his number without responding. I had spent 8 years watching him mock me while contributing nothing of value to anyone. I wasn't about to fund his laziness now. Delia called me once, late on a Tuesday night about 4 months after everything happened. Her voice was soft and broken. Nothing like the cold woman who had slid those divorce papers across the table. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She said she didn't realize what she had. She said she still loved me and asked if there was any chance we could try again. I let her finish speaking. Then I told her the truth. You had everything, Delia. You had a husband who loved you and would have done anything for you. That was worth more than money ever could be. But you couldn't see it, and I can't unsee the way you looked at me when you thought I had nothing. I hung up the phone and never spoke to her again. I took over the operations of Faro Hospitality, but not in the way most people expected. I didn't sit in a corner office barking orders at executives. I visited the restaurants. I walked through the hotels. I learned the names of the people who worked there, from the chefs to the housekeepers to the valets. I remembered birthdays. I asked about families. I became the kind of leader my Uncle Clement would have been proud of. I still restore furniture on the weekends. I kept my little workshop, and I still take on projects when I have time. It keeps me grounded. It reminds me of who I was before any of this happened and who I still want to be. About a year after that Christmas dinner, I was in my workshop sanding an old oak table when I discovered something unexpected. There was a hidden drawer in the back, stuck shut from years of disuse. I pried it open and found a single envelope inside, yellowed with age. It was a letter from Uncle Clement, written years before his death. I opened it with trembling hands and read his words. Owen, if you're reading this, you finally used the card. I never told you about the money because I wanted you to become a good man on your own terms. Anyone can be kind when they're rich. The real test is how you treat people when you have nothing. You pass that test every single day. I watched you work hard, stay humble, and love without conditions. That's why I left everything to you. Not because you needed it, but because you deserved it. Use it wisely. Stay good, and remember this. The people who love you when you have nothing are the only ones worth keeping when you have everything. I love you, son, Uncle Clement. I sat in that workshop for a long time, holding that letter, letting his words sink into my heart. I spent 8 years letting people convince me I was worthless. I believed them because I thought worth was measured by bank accounts and job titles and the opinions of people who never bothered to know me. But Uncle Clement understood something I didn't. Worth is about character. It's about showing up and doing the work and treating people with dignity even when no one is watching. That Christmas dinner changed my life. Not because I became wealthy, but because I finally understood that the people who mocked me were the ones who were truly poor. They had money and status and expensive clothes, but they had no integrity, no loyalty, no love. If you're out there right now feeling invisible, feeling like you're not enough, feeling like the world has counted you out, I want you to hear me. Your worth is not determined by the people who underestimate you. Keep going. Stay true to who you are. Your moment is coming. And when it does, make sure you're still the person who deserved it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own strength, I would truly appreciate it if you hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in Owen's shoes. I read every single comment, and I love hearing from you. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell so you never miss another story. We post videos every day filled with emotional, powerful, and inspiring stories, just like this one. Thank you for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next one.